So now that the case is over and I can talk about it freely, I figured I would share my story of the time I got kidnapped. This happened in 2021. I was around 20 at the time and I had just got off work around 11 p.m. and went straight home to get ready to go out and meet my friends at the club. He messaged me via Facebook Messenger to hang out and smoke, and I told him that I was meeting a friend and didn't want to hang out. So he then offered to drive me to and from the club. Well, around 12:30 a.m., he came to pick me up and said he had to dump some garbage first, and he had a couch on the back of his pickup truck, which I assumed was the garbage. He said he made us margaritas, but I told him I didn't want to drink till I got to my destination, so we ended up just smoking weed on the way to dump the couch. It was about a 25 to 30 minutes car ride to where he wanted to dump his couch, and by the time we made it to the destination, it was about 1:50 a.m. There was a logging road just off the side of the highway that goes for miles. He pulled all the way down to the end and left the couch there and then got back in his truck and started driving back towards the highway. But once we got halfway back to the highway, he stopped and put his truck in park and then pulled out a pipe and started smoking more weed. After taking a hit, he turned his head to me and stared at me for a minute with a weird smirk on his face, and then all of a sudden he almost looked like he wanted to jump at me but stopped himself in the moment with his hands in a motion that he was about to grab me. I got scared at this point and was frozen in shock, not knowing if it was a joke or not. I quickly realized it was not a joke and opened my door like I was about to get out, but he did the same. I closed my door and he closed his too. We ended up playing door tag, and eventually he got tired of it and got out of this truck and ran to my side. He opened my door and tried pulling me out by my legs. As I was trying to kick him, I pulled out my phone out to call the police, and of course my Face ID didn't want to work in that moment, and he ended up snatching the phone out of my hands. I kicked him hard enough in the chest and he flew backwards, falling to his butt. I grabbed my purse and hopped out of the truck and started running towards the highway. I kept looking back to see how far behind me was, and he gave me a head start before running after me, grabbing me by the back of my shoulders and forcefully throwing me into a ditch. I landed on my stomach with one leg straight out and the other one was bent at a weird angle. He sat on top of my legs and was holding my left hand behind my back. I screamed and begged him to bring me home and that I wouldn't tell anyone. He got upset and tried suffocating me with his other hand while still holding my left hand behind my back. I kept trying to pull his hands off me with my right hand because it got to the point where I couldn't even breathe. Finally, he let go of my face, and as I turned my head around to see what he was doing, and to my surprise, I watched him pull zip ties out of his front jean pocket. He zipped tied my hands behind my back and then tried forcefully pulling my panties off me. I remember digging my knees into the ground so he couldn't get them off, and he didn't. He got up and started pacing, saying, "It shouldn't have happened this way. Just do what I say." I cried, telling him if he was going to do anything to then put me back into the truck, and he did. After all that went down, he got back in the truck, and mind you, I'm still tied up at this point. Then he drove back to the highway and started driving around. I made up every excuse to get him to take them zip ties off me, and he just wouldn't. At this point, I thought to myself, what can I do to get myself out of this situation? And I thought I was gonna die. I don't want to talk about what I said, but I said some things to him, and he loved it so much he started saying he would put me on his life insurance policy. Eventually, I asked him again if he would take the zip ties off, since they were so tight it was cutting my circulation. He then pulled to the side of the road and pulled out a mini pocket knife from his car keys and cut them off me. It took a few tries because of how tight they were and gave me my phone back. I had a watch on my wrist and asked him for it. After noticing it wasn't on my wrist anymore, he had this surprised look on his face and said, "We need to go back and get it." He then turned around and headed back to where all of that just happened at. At this point, I thought to myself, yep, this is it. I'm going to die tonight and nobody will know until somebody finds my dead body. Once we got there, he told me to stay in the truck and he got out and searched the ditch for my watch. I then opened the door and started running into the trees, and honestly, I didn't even look back. I ran for around 30 minutes straight and started calling the police. When the police had arrived, I started running back to the highway, and unfortunately he wasn't there anymore. After getting to my mom's house, I looked up his name on Google and he was on parole for first-degree murder. He had served 70 years in prison for murdering somebody for the life insurance policy. I'm 22 now, and I'm so thankful I got to see another day, and I was to testify against him, and he was found guilty November 6, 2023 of all charges. I was home alone one night back in 2009, and my parents were out on their weekly date nights. Anyways, I had just returned from my afternoon jog, and being a hot August day, I had worked up quite a sweat on my run, so I decided to take a cold shower and clean up a bit. My house doesn't have air conditioning and was quite stuffed up, so I decided to open a few windows to circulate the airflow within the house. I can remember opening a window in the kitchen, two windows across from each other in the living room, and one window in the basement. I knew I was going to be spending my evening down there watching movies since it was much cooler. I had my shower and got dressed and went downstairs to make myself some dinner. I took my dinner down to the basement and flicked on Netflix to start my binge-filled night of new shows. I do not recall falling asleep, but I must have passed out not long after eating my food and lying down. When I woke up, it was dark outside, and the only light being cast into the basement was from the dimly lit TV screen. It was now freezing in the basement, and I could feel a cold breeze circulating the room from having the window open for too long. I closed the window and then went back to turn off the TV and grab my dishes and head upstairs. When I got upstairs, all the lights were off, indicating that my parents were still not home from their date. I cleaned the dishes and put them in the dishwasher and closed the window above the sink. Just before I went to go up to my room for the night, I remembered that the windows in the living room were still open. I walked over to close the one window by the TV and then over to the next, which was located by the front porch. I noticed that my mom's vase with fake flowers was knocked off the table in front of the window and the flowers were sprawled out across the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe there was a strong breeze and the curtains had tipped it over. I closed the window and started picking up the flowers, and as I was cleaning, I heard a faint squeaky sound. What I could only imagine was a door handle being twisted. Maybe just a few seconds after, I heard a creak in the hallway floor upstairs. A pain shot from my stomach to my chest, and I froze. What seemed like an eternity of being bent over with my one hand holding the vase and the other one clutching the flowers, I slowly stood up. I then looked out the front window to check the driveway for my parents' car, hoping it was one of them upstairs. The driveway was empty and my heart sank. I quickly but quietly put the vase and the flowers down on the table and silently began walking over to the bottom of the stairs to look up. As I got closer to the stairs, I heard two more creaks on the floor, which caused me to stop dead in my tracks. I then waited since I was too scared to go all the way to the stairs. I was now only a few steps away from the stairs, and I took those last few steps. I peeked around the corner and only saw darkness. I didn't know what to do. Do I flick on the lights and let the potential intruder in my house know that I'm coming upstairs? Or do I leave and go to a friend's house? Do I call my parents, or do I grow a pair and just go upstairs? I decided to turn my phone on silent and go to the kitchen to text my dad, making sure I was close to the back door for an easy getaway. My dad said it's an old house and it's just settling after a really hot day. I told him about the sound of the door handle twisting, and he just assumed there was an open window upstairs and the wind was knocking a door against the frame. I felt a huge chunk of my anxiety start to fade after talking with my dad. I then decided to grab a glass of water and head up onto bed. I flicked on the lights for the stairs and started making my way up. I got to the top of the stairs and noticed that all of the doors were wide open except for mine. My parents' room and the spare bedroom were on the left, and the den and my room were on the right, with the bedroom at the end of the hallway. Though, as my dad had predicted, my door was cracked just enough that a breeze could be making it hit the frame. It being as hot as it was today, it wasn't unusual for my mom to open all the doors and windows upstairs. I exhaled a sigh of relief, and now fully confident that my dad was right, I went into my room and did a quick look around and walked over to my nightstand to put my water beside my laptop. I then went off to the bathroom to get ready for bed. As I lay in bed trying to get sleepy, I was watching my favorite reruns of Seinfeld on my laptop. Then out of nowhere, I heard a sound of something slowly scraping my closet door. I quickly flicked on the light beside my bed, and my closet door was cracked open ever so slightly. A question started racing through my head. Was it open the whole time, or was it closed when I came in? I was positive that it was closed when I came in. Before I even had time to rationalize my thoughts, I heard the most disturbing and sinister giggle I've ever heard in my life. No horror movie could ever replicate the sound I just heard. As soon as I slid my laptop off my legs, the closet door burst open and someone was standing in the closet. My clothes were partially covering their body and face. I looked closer and that was the most palest, dirtiest woman I have ever seen, and for the split second that I saw her in horror, the image was burned into my brain forever. She had no shoes on her, disgusting, dirt-stained feet, and her skin was sickeningly white with cuts and dried blood from her face down her arms all the way to her legs. She was wearing what I assume used to be a white nightgown, was now a discolored mess of dirt, blood, and who knows what else. She then asked in a quiet, grumbling, raspy voice,
"Have you seen my baby?"
That was enough for me to grab my phone and run the hell out of there. As soon as I was halfway out of my bedroom door, I heard her shriek,
"Give me back my baby!"
I ran as fast as I could to the upstairs bathroom and locked the door. And right away I heard a huge crash against the door, along with the woman screaming in a devilish tone demanding I return her baby to her. I called 911 and the operator assured me the police would be there as fast as they could, and I jammed my feet against the door and held my back against the sink, trying my hardest to make sure the door stayed closed. The woman just wouldn't give up, and her shrieks turned into low demon-like grunts, and her banging on the door turned into heavy bloody blows. With what seemed like an eternity, I heard a heavenly sound. I heard the police call out that they were entering the residence. All I could hear next was a mixed commotion of the officers yelling and the woman growling. The officers ended up pepper spraying the woman, and it took 3 of them to be able to force her to the ground. She was yelling in a possessed-like state the entire time, and I did not come out of the bathroom until the cops assured me she was out of the house. The cops told me she was likely on drugs or an escaped mental patient from the next country over. I tried telling them that she sounded like she was possessed or something, but they chalked it up to be the woman just needing her medication. My parents arrived home shortly after I gave my statements to the police, and we moved out of that house 1 month later. I have always enjoyed walking in the woods and camping. I particularly enjoy the solitude and the fresh air. On most trips, nothing noteworthy beyond seeing some majestic deer ever happens, with one exception. About a year ago, I was on a solo camping trip in the United Kingdom. I was in an area I had never been to before, and exploring a new place was a great joy for me. My plan was to hike a few miles into the woods and spend the next few days camping out near a mountain lake. On the first night, all was well and I was really enjoying myself. The next morning, I took a swim in the lake because it was during the summer. When I go solo camping, I like to go to out-of-the-way places to avoid seeing other people, and I was pleasantly enjoying this area because although I thought I might see other people here, there was no sign of anybody. As I sat by my fire on the second night, I took out my harmonica and started playing a little tune. Just going with what sounded good, I made up a little melody. I was playing my new melody for about 15 to 20 minutes and then decided to take a break. And when I stopped playing, I heard something way off in the distance. I was in the woods at night, so hearing animals move about was just about normal, so I wasn't alarmed. After a short while, I decided to play my melody again, and as I was playing, I could again hear a noise in the distance, but this time I could tell it was closer. I thought it was probably a deer or some other animal messing about and put it out of my mind. It was at this time I decided to call it a night, and I started sleeping. On the third day, I had decided I was going to take a long walk. I had scouted out this area on a map before I went and knew there was a waterfall not too far away. I packed some lunch, some water, and my harmonica and then headed out. It took me about 2 to 3 hours to reach the waterfall, but it was worth it since it was so beautiful. I climbed to the top and enjoyed a lunch taking in the view. After eating my lunch, I thought it would be a great time to practice the melody that I made up the night before. As soon as I started to play, I could hear not too far away from me another instrument playing along with me. The sound of someone playing with me was alarming, so I stopped, and when I stopped, the accompanying sound also stopped. I stood up and I was looking around to try and see who had been playing with me, but I didn't see anybody. I called out if anybody was there, but I heard no response. At the time, I thought that maybe I had imagined the sound, and I sat back down and started to play again, and when I started playing again, I could again hear someone playing with me. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew I was not imagining this. Once again, I stopped, and the sound also stopped. I knew something or someone was out there. At this point, I was afraid and thought I should head back to my campsite, and maybe even head home. I packed my stuff up and headed back to my camp, and as I made the long walk back, I was starting to feel more afraid, but I just kept walking. At some point, I thought that I might have been going the wrong way because I wasn't recognizing anything, even though I was sure I was heading back the way I'd gone to get to the waterfall earlier that morning. And knowing at the time the only way out of the woods was to carry on, I just kept walking. Then after I reached a clearing I had not been in before, and I now knew I was lost. At this point, I wasn't sure if someone was still following me, so I took out my harmonica and started playing the melody again. As soon as I started playing, to my surprise, I heard the sound again. It was another instrument playing along with me. I kept playing and started to look around, and although I still could not see anything, I could hear the sound getting closer and closer. I was terrified now. I wanted to know who was following me, so I kept playing. Soon I caught sight of what was playing the flute, and from out of the darkness of the woods came a huge lumbering creature. I could not believe my eyes, and as I played, it played as well and slowly moved closer. The only way for me to describe it was like a deer just standing up on two legs. The creature had a nasty smell to it, and its arms were fleshy but covered in sores. The flute was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and it was making a raspy noise more akin to a dying rabbit. Finally, I was able to stop playing, but I could still not move, and when I stopped, it also stopped. To my surprise, the creature then said something. Now, to be honest, I couldn't say anything back. I was too scared and I was frozen. For the next few seconds, what felt like hours, we just kept looking at each other. After building my courage up for a bit, I started to turn around and started running as fast as I could. After a few minutes, I ended up at my camp, and I did not stop to pack up my things. I simply kept running. Now that I knew where I was heading for my car, and I was getting out there as fast as I could. Now, to be quite honest with you, I've read a lot of stories about skinwalkers, but I never believed in it. Until this encounter.